Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Hello and welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. Tonight's guest in our interview segment is Bill Hawkins, known to many as Farmer Bill in Nebraska, who's been lobbying the Nebraska legislature for changes in their hemp, medical marijuana, and adult use recreational marijuana markets as well. So it's a fascinating interview with a longtime activist that'll be coming up after a very short but sweet hemp news segment. Plus, as always, our infamous dancing cannabis leaves.
I feel the force.
Okay, our first story tonight is from out in the Pacific in Honolulu, Hawaii. Licensing Hawaiian businesses to engage in cultivating and selling cannabis to adults will create thousands of jobs and raise tens of millions of dollars in new tax revenue, according to an economic assessment provided by the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association. The authors of the report estimated that legalization will create 3,375 new jobs and will yield nearly $82 million in annual tax revenue for the Hawaii state government. Several bills are pending in the state legislature to legalize the adult use cannabis market. Newly elected Hawaii Governor Democrat Josh Green pledged as a candidate that he would sign legalization legislation if such a bill was advanced by the legislature. Although the dispensing of medical cannabis has been legal in Hawaii since 2000, about 23 years, criminal penalties remain in place for the adult possession of more than 3 grams of marijuana. The full text of this analysis, the HICIA 2023 Adult Use Market and Tax Projection Report, is available from the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association. On a national level, it was with great fanfare that the President of the United States in October last year, October 4th to be exact, announced plans to provide blanket pardons to all Americans suffering from the stigma of having a federal marijuana possession conviction on their criminal records. At the time, last October, the President said, quote, "There are thousands of people who have prior federal convictions for marijuana possession who may be denied employment, housing, educational opportunities as a result. My action will help relieve the collateral consequences arising from these convictions," end quote. The ensuing media frenzy was swift and warranted. Never before had a sitting president overtly acknowledged the failures of America's nearly century-old experiment with cannabis prohibition, a policy that some 2/3 of Americans now say ought to be repealed and that nearly half of all U.S. states have done away with already. And never before had a president promised to use the president's office's pardon power to provide legal relief to so many victims of that failed policy. The move was truly historic, so much so that the Biden's Domestic Policy Council Director, Susan Rice, recently took to Twitter to hail the announcement as one of the Biden administration's crowning achievements of the year 2022. Yet despite the congratulatory brouhaha, there remains an inconvenient truth. None of the at least 6,557 Americans identified by the U.S. Sentencing Commission has been eligible for presidential pardons has received them yet. Troubling, some 3 months following Biden's pronunciation, the Justice Department's website specifies the application for certification of pardon for simple possession of marijuana is not yet available. So I am eligible for 2 federal pardons, one in Washington, D.C. on the United States Capitol grounds back in 1990, and another one for possession of 2 grams in my home here in Portland, Oregon, convicted back in 93 for an arrest in 91. But I have been checking the government's website every week, and I see that sentence. The administration's failure to move swiftly to fulfill its pardon directive is disappointing. As previously acknowledged by the president, many of those eligible for forgiveness have suffered numerous lost opportunities over the years because of a lingering conviction for behavior that most Americans no longer believe should be a crime. We should not have to continue to wait for relief any longer. Fortunately, however, many states are doing what the president has thus far only promised, pardoning ex-marijuana offenders and expunging their criminal records. To date, 24 states have enacted laws providing explicit pathways to either expunge or otherwise set aside the records of those with low-level marijuana convictions. According to publicly available data, state and local officials have issued over 100,000 pardons and more than 1.7 million marijuana-related expungements since 2018. We think that these totals will grow even higher were Congress to enact bipartisan legislation like the HOPE Act, which the last two United States Congresses passed but didn't get through the Senate. It seeks to provide federal funding to provide states for the purposes of reviewing and expunging low-level cannabis convictions. Over the past decades, police have made an estimated 29 million marijuana-related arrests. Of those arrested, some 90% were charged with low-level cannabis possession offenses. It's time for lawmakers on both sides of the political spectrum, and for the White House in particular, to move swiftly to right the past wrongs of cannabis criminalization by providing long overdue legal relief to those who needlessly suffered under America's failed marijuana prohibition laws. The last story tonight is from Oklahoma. A federal judge for the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Oklahoma has ruled that a long-standing federal law prohibiting marijuana users from possessing firearms is unconstitutional. The decision marks the first time that a federal court has ruled against the government's broad interpretation of a 1968 law prohibiting the possession or sale of a firearm to an unlawful user of a federally controlled substance. In 2016, a three-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the federal government's interpretation of the law, opining that the ban, quote, furthers the government's interest in preventing gun violence because marijuana users are more likely to be involved in violent crimes, end quote. Last week's court ruling rejected that argument, finding that, quote, the mere use of marijuana does not indicate that someone is in fact dangerous or has a proclivity for violence, end quote. In fact, the Oregon Supreme Court ruled in 2011 that Oregon sheriffs cannot deny concealed handgun licenses, also known as carry permits, to Oregon medical marijuana card holders. Well, that's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight. Our interview with Bill Hawkins in Nebraska, also known as Farmer Bill, is coming right up in a moment. If you or a loved one need help finding a doctor who can help you obtain a medical marijuana permit, or you have other questions regarding medical marijuana or adult use marijuana, give us a call at 503-235-4606. That's 503-235-4606. Now we have our interview with Farmer Bill Hawkins in Nebraska. Tune in all the time and help us restore him. Good night. I would like to introduce a friend of mine, as many of our guests are, Bill Hawkins. Bill is in Nebraska. Hey, Bill, welcome to the show.
Paul, buddy, I am. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and it's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to have you on. That's for sure. It's been quite a while. We initially met at the Great Midwest Marijuana Harvest Fest in Madison, Wisconsin, where you were tabling and had a exhibition booth showing all kinds of different hemp products. And when we were filming at our studio, we had your little hempcrete block there on our table for many years that you had given me. We aren't filming in the studio right now. We haven't done that since the pandemic, but if our viewers want to look, they can look back at that. So you have been working, you brought Dr. Rachel Knox and I to Nebraska back in, was it 2018 or 19? It was one of those.
I think 2018.
Yeah, to the Nebraska Judiciary Committee to testify about a medical marijuana bill. And as I recall, I don't remember if it made it out of committee. But for our viewers who probably don't know, Nebraska is the only state that has a unicameral legislature. They only have one house in the legislature, the Senate. It started out as a bicameral state with a House and a Senate, like the United States federal government and all the states have, but they voted back sometime a long time ago to go unicameral. When did they do that, Bill?
It was in the 1920s. It was more efficient, and being an agricultural farmer state, the senators saw that back in the old days, that it would be a better system.
I remember we flew in there to Lincoln, and we went in and sat in the Senate chambers up in the gallery. And as we were sitting there, they announced that Dr. Rachel Knox and Paul Stanford are in the house, and everybody in the house stood up and applauded, which really impressed me. I did not expect anything like that, that the Senate would applaud us. I thought that was a big deal until about 5 minutes later when an elementary school class, like a fifth grade class or something, came in and they announced them and they all stood up and applauded the fifth grade class too. So that kind of put it in perspective there. But
Yeah,
have,
it was quite a deal to get you into the chamber itself. Not all school people. Yeah,
of the whole state capitol, which is just a fantastic architectural building. It's kind of like it's got a high-rise portion to it. It's I don't know, something like 20 stories tall, right?
it's at least 20 stories. It goes, yeah, with the solar on top, it is. It is an incredible historic building, 38 types of marble from all over the world that built that building. But back when we brought you back, Frank, and with the Nebraska Hemp Company, we were able to bring you back there. And it was quite a deal to get you inside the chamber and sit where the senators do. So that was quite a deal. But
So tell us how
yes,
it's got there. You know, Nebraska is unfortunately one of 3 states that do not even have any provisions for medical marijuana. It's Nebraska, Idaho, and Alabama. All the rest of the states have some regulation to provide medical marijuana to some illness patients with certain illnesses. But Nebraska has been a bastion of the Republican Party, and they have been strongly wrapped up in that. You want to talk? Has it ever made it out of the Judiciary Committee in terms of the marijuana law?
we had one bill. I think it was possibly that Senator Wishart's. No, it was Senator Garrett's first bill. When I first got into activism here a while ago, Paul, I thought it would be easy once I learned that hemp concrete, medicine, and all that. And I never realized until my eyes were open just where I sat in the country on that pipeline and that final ending of the war on drugs that we're sitting on here. In 2010, a group, Hemp Nebraska, which was helping end misguided prohibition, we went before the pharmacy board and talked about medical cannabis. And then it wasn't anywhere to go. They didn't have any authority. And so we spent some years out doing rallies and stuff. And then with a hemp history event, I went into the Capitol and started setting up display tables. Frank and I, first little table in 2014, got a hemp bill passed, but then the Republican Governor Ricketts, that everybody internationally knows as, making the statement that if you legalize medical marijuana, it will kill the kids in the street. And
yeah, it's insanity.
I was privileged to be right behind the TV cameras in the Capitol Rotunda watching him when he said that. And I said, thank you, because he just showed the insanity of our opposition. And so
right.
Senator Wishart has introduced a third bill. We just had the public hearing this last Thursday, and she has whittled it down to a little green pill and a vaporizer.
I see.
And that is controlled by the lobby group, Altria, Big Tobacco, hiring our heavy hitter lobbyists and introducing that bill. And so it has a very strict patient limit. And so it really doesn't do a lot of Nebraska's medical patients a lot of good.
Nebraska was a big hemp producer. for a long time until hemp was outlawed in the 30s, 90 years ago almost. And Nebraska's Fish and Wildlife Department have stopped the police from harvesting wild feral cannabis left over, because you can't really wipe out cannabis. It's a weed and it will just keep growing. But the Fish and Wildlife Department there said the sparrows need this. The sparrows depend on these seeds for their diet. And so we don't want you to wipe out the feral hemp stands. And in fact, when there's a big drought and everything's turned brown, the hemp plant puts down a very deep taproot, and it'll be the only thing that's green out there, right?
Our heirloom hemp genetics are adapted to our dry conditions from the eastern part of the state to the western part of the state. And that high protein seed crop is valuable for all kinds of native birds. And we also have a hunting season on turtle doves. And so that's the place to set up to hunt turtle doves. And so our genetic treasure trove of genetics here in Nebraska is known around the world as having just an adaptability. And there's a discussion of the different introductions of seed throughout the last 100, 200 years or whenever, even from probably the monasteries in California and northern Mexico. And so we have a treasure trove of genetics. And coming up here in the next month, my hemp seeds are germinating, and can take 6 inches of snow and down into the teens in nighttime temperatures, even though it's an annual plant, and just grow like gangbusters.
Mm-hmm. So, here in the United States and Canada and Europe, they allowed industrial hemp. In Europe, the longest, Canada, about 15 or 20 years, and in the United States, about 5 years now. So the law, though, in all of these places is that we can only grow industrial hemp if it has less than a 1/3 THC. Once you measure 0.4 or 0.4% THC in a plant, then it becomes a marijuana plant. It changes species.
It explodes into the devil.
Right, exactly. But in other countries now, like South America, Mexico, Thailand, they're allowing industrial hemp at 1% THC. If a farmer that's growing hemp has something that's 0.4% or greater, then they can't harvest that. They have to destroy it, which is a tragedy for a farmer. But that's the way it's shaken up. How is the hemp industry setting up there in Nebraska?
It never developed because of our state ag director and the governor limiting the licensing at the beginning. But by the time we got into it, the only viable part of hemp that we're seeing is the flower part, the smokable flower. And I think that's wrong. That that should be in low grade recreational or medicinal cannabis, and we really need to have hemp as an industry be fiber and food. And I think that's an issue. Like right now I'm dealing with here in Nebraska. Nobody cares about legalizing recreational cannabis because we have all the weed we want. It's priced at $200 or less an ounce, and you can get deals on $500 pounds right here because of the surplus in black market states. And so, but we have every single cannabinoid that is 3 times more powerful than THC. I've got THP, THC, Delta 6. All of them are available here in our hemp stores. selling jars of weed with sprayed on synthetic cannabinoids. So people don't care, and they have all their gummies. We can buy 100 milligram shots of THC Delta 9 here in the stores, and it's legal because it's, quote, derived from hemp. And so we've lost that direction of industrial hemp, if you really want me to get off on a tangent. But
For sure, we need to be growing hemp for seed, for food. I mean, here in Oregon, you can go in the grocery store and get hemp cereal, hemp snacks, hemp milk, hemp bread. Uh,
and it isn't as widely available here in Nebraska, even though we have more tillable acres than almost any state. And I've been working in the legislature to see if I can get hemp processing. And if we could set up processing in every county and bring in enough bales to run 60 bales a day, we could be processing particle board, hemp fiberglass, and hemp concrete. But our unicameral, like every government entity, is broken. And so US government, whatever government, is broken, and they never get anything done. And I think that's a tragedy here in our democracy, is that there's too much bickering, too much politics. We're supposed to be a unicameral where we aren't Republicans and Democrats, and yet I've watched this legislative session for about a month, and all they're doing is fighting over politics. And it's a shame and a disservice to the citizens that should be in there protesting. And that's one thing about our unicameral. In our state constitution, it labels the citizen as the second house. And so we have the ability to petition our government. We have the ability to walk in and demand that things be done more than any other state. And that's something that I took real serious.
So there have been petition drives in Nebraska. As I recall, the courts have kept them off the ballot, even though the governor, I think, has been challenging them. You want to give us a brief history of marijuana and hemp legalization petitions in Nebraska?
I can give you, I guess, the information that I've come across since I've been doing it. Frank, that you and I know, a real dear activist and incredible person who's just had it with this war on drugs and being in this state. And he wrote a couple petitions, and then came a time where, in talking with a friend of ours in the Secretary of State's office, I started writing a right to use petition. And because we have a real problem here in Nebraska, for some reason, we are one of the greatest states here in the country, but it's hard to get people involved. When we have the first tax and regulate bill 2 years ago ever introduced in the state, I took copies of the bills all around the cities, explained to the business owners of the pipe shops and the hemp shops, here's your chance. Come testify, fill the Capitol. When we had our first medical bill, it filled rooms and filled the halls. Since then, it just hasn't happened. And so we never got any progress on any of our petitions. And as a single person, a poor farmer, organic farmer and herbalist, I can't do it all myself. And if people aren't going to step up and help, then it's not going to happen. So those petitions never got challenged. And then the medical marijuana movement, which they continued using for a number of years, and as you know, Paul, and you're one of the best ones about it, The term marijuana is a derogatory, racist, prohibition-era term used to demonize the plant with great roots in health. But they've been advised by Marijuana Policy Project. I don't know if I can name people, but I'm going to.
Certainly can, yeah.
And I feel they don't care. And so the first petition, anybody in the state that has any knowledge of legislative actions and petition writing knew from the beginning that we have a single subject law in our petition process. And that had so many subjects in it that it was bound to be thrown out. So to blame the court or the governor, yeah, sure, he's against it and he funds it, the opposition, but it's a couple state senators who cannot get bills across the legislature that shouldn't be in the petition process that's reserved for the people. That's just an opinion. But so the first petition got thrown out. They have 200,000 signatures that basically they deceive the people, fundraising. If you know that this petition is going to get thrown out and still collect 200,000 signatures, seems deception to me. The last petition they ran had a cannabis commission created that the governor may appoint 2 members, which isn't even a voting quorum. And that was one of the petitions they ran. They couldn't get funding, but at the same time, they have kept investors and people away from the people's petition that we, Nebraska Hemp Company, all persons have a right to use all plants in the genus cannabis. We have
That's pretty simple.
very simple. I've learned from the process of looking at the Supreme Court dissertation on the first petition they threw out. The second group of petitions that Marijuana Policy Project was in here registered as a lobbyist to advise them on was even worse written. It just, both of them, they ran 2 petitions and they claim sympathy, and yet they're keeping real access to cannabis away from 200,000 to 400,000 Nebraska citizens. So we've already refiled in July, and I'm working on the infrastructure to get this petition on the ballot for 2024. But Paul, I'm tired of it. And I'm tired of fighting every day, educating these senators. I try not to call it a battle, but it is. And working myself as an unpaid citizen lobby and doing events. I'll send you the pictures of our displays in the Capitol.
I think you did. And then I have
I've got some even better ones.
Okay.
But it's something that I want to do. I could have moved, been out with you, or been in Colorado, but I enjoy life in Nebraska. I've got 50 acres, 20 miles from here, right next to the biggest lake in eastern Nebraska, and I just learned to sail, Paul. And so I'm happy, but I just have to grow legal cannabis and as many strains as I want.
And then you can go retire to your sailboat out on that lake.
Yeah, no, the lake's not, I'm going intercoastal sailing, Paul. And so down Gulf of Texas, out into the Great Lakes, I'm ready to start sailing.
Okay, well, that's good. You have been tabling there at the Nebraska legislature for many years. I have pictures from when we were there back in 2018 with Dr. Knox, which now that's 5 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun.
I've got a picture of the first table, which was 2014. And it's just one little table. And Frank and I are standing there, and I just came across it, and it's amazing that it's been that long. But I was bored with farmers markets, and both my parents had died, passed away, and I thought this would be easy. And once you get into that capital, I enjoy it, and I've gotten real good at interacting with senators and legislative aides. And going into this session, our tables were in for 2 full weeks, and going into the session, there was no thought of introducing a tax and regulate bill. And I said, that's pathetic with Missouri, our neighbor, right now selling recreational cannabis, 3-ounce limit. And I said that, and so I got a tax and regulate cannabis bill introduced.
All right.
And
was it Senator Wishart?
No, not at all. No, because of the devil weed that is separated from the medical cannabis for people, she stays away from tax and regulate, even though she made national news stating that she would introduce tax and regulate legislation, but she hasn't ever got to it. So,
well, if you can't get medical to pass, you're not going to be able to get tax and regulate.
Paul,
some of those Republicans want to see tax and regulate instead of medical.
My call to them now is, if you do not support a tax and regulated market in this day and age, then you are supporting that continued black market and endangering the life of our citizens by forcing them to go to the black market, where they will also run across white powder that can potentially contain fentanyl, which, as we know, is a huge epidemic here in this state. And so the only way we can keep our children safe, which is our new governor's key statement, is to have it into a tax and regulated system that creates local sustainable jobs benefiting the local community. That's what happens sometimes when I go off on when you're in the Capitol, you have to be able to just go on a dime and be able to give your elevator speech and be able to feel the time when it's time to back off. So it's been fun, Paul. And as I've made the statement earlier, all of this has been done under the creative, motivational influence of ganja, marijuana, reefer, and just cannabis.
Kids are dying in the streets.
And the kids are dying in the streets. And yet we have evidence that the MTF, the Monitoring the Future, which happens to be 50 years of monitoring high school and youth cannabis use and other substances, that in legal states and around the country, the use of cannabis has dropped and not spiked like we hear from law enforcement.
Yeah. In the states where it's legal, the use by underage kids has gone down for both medical and recreational. Well, if you're in Lincoln, how long does it take you to drive to Missouri to buy some cannabis in their stores?
If I can, and we just put in a nice 4-lane through the countryside over to the Missouri River. And so to get to the border of Missouri, it's 3 hours. But Kansas City, Missouri is a big tourist destination. Yeah. And a lot of Nebraskans go to Missouri for the weekend. They have Worlds of Fun. They have the Kansas City Royals. The Chiefs now are the Super Bowl champs. And what is in our state, I look at things all the time. And so Missouri happens to have the largest daily purchase rate of any state now. So you can go down there and buy 3 ounces of cannabis every day.
And so you got people coming from Nebraska and the Dakotas and Iowa and all these states where they don't have legal marijuana, where
Mis-
there's
Missouri borders 8 states. And so that was an article I came across that Missouri borders 8 states now. And so you think the scramble in the East Coast is happening right now. There's going to be, all I can say, Paul, is the war on cannabis is slowly corroding away. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to be the last one, but it's going to be a battle. It's we need help out here in the great Midwest of Nebraska, definitely. So when you listen to our law enforcement opposition, and I have a high school acquaintance that's the communications director of the Attorney General's office, and one of those purists, and the potency. Oh, the potency. It's just so potent. And
and
back,
that's the thing.
yes, and I wish I could find some good potent ganja
Right.
that would really knock me out.
I've never had it knock me out.
I have
never had any
over
cannabis knock
50
me out.
years.
I think I have tried the best.
Yeah, Paul, you more than me probably have consumed some real quality ganja. I have over 50 years of real life practical cannabis experience. And as a high school senior, with the talk of, it will be here everywhere if we legalize cannabis, we were dealing pot out of our lockers. And we had Acapulco Gold, we had Columbia Gold, because I was an entrepreneur. I was able to buy low, sell high, and have my cannabis that I consumed at a discount price. I never made money, but I enjoyed the cannabis culture. As I got older, out of high school, it continued, and the gateway effect became a reality when, instead of going to a legal, tax and regulated store that just sold cannabis, I was visiting my black market drug dealer who handed me a bag of White Crosses. Never in my life until a year or two ago did I realize that that was methamphetamine.
Yeah.
One try of that, and that is not for me. Don't want it any good. But then came the magic powder, again from the illegal drug dealer,
Right.
and cocaine. Oh my God, I am king. I am Superman. I can play basketball. I can do anything, until the deterioration of snorting away the farm, the marriage, and everything.
Right. Right.
Thank
I'm glad you've
the Lord that I told myself, you have to get away from this. You can smoke as much pot as you want, just walk away. And that was, I don't know, 40 years ago or more.
I have a collection of antique medical marijuana containers, and many of them say, from Park Davis and Eli Lilly, that it's for the habituates of opiates, cocaine, chloroform, and alcohol, to help them get off of those other more dangerous drugs. And fortunately, when you tried it, they didn't have fentanyl mixed in. I
know, and that's, thank God for that. That
story just a few weeks ago where 3 young couples with children thought they had cocaine and they snorted it, and all but one of them died from the fentanyl that was in their cocaine. They thought they were up, whatever they were doing, it wasn't going to kill them.
I can't believe that people are still going anywhere near any white powder or any illicit pill. It makes no sense.
And not that many people keep track of the news, unfortunately.
No, and New Year's Eve, I'm at our local Grateful Dead band at a local bar, during a break, and just so happens in the courtyard in the back, everybody's smoking pot. You know, you have 4 or 5 different joints coming different ways to you. And somebody comes out and starts asking if anybody has any Narcan. And because I'm a concerned citizen on anything that has to do with drugs now, I went to see what was happening, and guy doesn't go out much or anything, but it just turned blue and dropped. And the first thing they did was go to the bar and ask if they had Narcan. They don't. We can get it free here. And that was my first exposure, real life. And it is just it's where law enforcement should be spending their time and not going after cannabis users across the country. That's
sure. Well, here in Oregon, we've now made it where people with personal use quantities of any drug cannot be arrested, but they are arrested for selling things without a license.
sure.
I can tell you though, our busiest dispensary in the whole state is right on the Idaho border in Ontario, Oregon, about 45 minutes from Boise, Idaho. And their parking lot is just full of cars from Idaho. And the state police try to arrest people bringing marijuana in from Oregon to Idaho, but you know, they can't get very much of it at all. But
Big roadblocks and just stop every car and grab them all.
yeah, well, they can't do that. They don't have that kind of resources,
Oh,
fortunately. I
geez.
mean, it's
It's
crazy that we're getting to that
that,
stage,
and
though.
that,
But you've been tabling at the legislature since 2014, and you were saying you have this picture when you just started. What is your tabling process now there?
um,
I know you have big jars of hemp and cannabis there,
um,
right?
the last, since we expanded to medical, and then because of the proliferation of bud all over the cities and stuff, I just started putting more and more jars. But in this this bud here is a cola that was sent to me from a hemp grower in Ogallala, Nebraska. Nebraska company, I think, is the deal. And
Pretty good size. I would call that a trophy bud.
oh, you know, Paul, in growing ganja for over 50 years, yeah, it's pretty good, but I think I can do a lot better
Yeah,
in
I've got a
real
lot.
ganja, not hemp. But I've done big bouquets of just ditchweed buds. I bring in bundles of hemp stalks that scratch the ceiling. And I know 3 or 4 years ago when I first was bringing big bundles of stalks, 2 of the state patrol in the Capitol that are head security people, and I've gotten to know them all good. They all know me. They know I'm not a gun nut and a crazy. But I'm carrying in a big bundle of stalks at 5 o'clock just so I don't make a mess. And one of the stalks has kind of an old dried bud on it, but a pretty good little cola. And I'm walk up to these 2 guys, and I'm kind of keeping the stalks so they can't really see the bud behind me. I'm like, oh, they're going to do something. And I ask these guys, you think ever in your life that you would think you'd see this crazy old guy carrying in these bundles of hemp stalks into your Capitol? And one of the guy goes, no, not really. And the other guy, he's one of the ones that more would prefer to put me in a headlock and tase me. But I go, you know, never in my life did I think I'd be doing this either. But we continued to where I got a plexiglass case and I put jars of bud in there. But we have a unique situation in our Nebraska Hemp Farming Act that Nebraska heirloom hemp that is recognized as naturally occurring stands of cannabis.
What is THC level? What is the THC level in the heirloom hemp?
Because it's not part of the act, we've had people tested to where it's probably way within the limits, probably even 0.1%. But that depends on the genetics of where, what patch. There's probably been improved genetics from recreational cannabis users thrown out over the years in different patches. But it states in our Hemp Farming Act that Nebraska heirloom hemp isn't part of, if it's not cultivated for commercial purposes, isn't part of the Hemp Farming Act. And so what that was is if you were a hemp farmer and you had your plot lined out, you weren't in trouble for a patch of ditchweed that was over on the edge of the field. But as a wild crafter, which is ancient gathering of materials from the wild, if I did not cultivate that hemp patch, then I can gather it from the wild. So a lot of the jars the last couple of years, the big jars, have been my own buds harvested from the farm that because it's not part of the Hemp Farming Act, I can't get a license number to get it tested. And who knows the improved genetics that were in there. But I've had some big jars of good bud in the Nebraska state capitol for the last couple of years, and had just open the jars and pull out big buds and colas. And it's been fun in this, in the state that I'm in. It's been fun and I'm enjoying it.
Do you think there's any chance that a medical or recreational bill will see the light of day or even get a hearing in the Nebraska legislature this year?
We just had our medical hearing, and then in the afternoon, we had two combined hearings of a decrim bill, which we were one of 7 or 8 states back in the 70s that first decrimmed.
I remember.
And then my full tax and regulate bill was a combined hearing. And so that upset me because I went to a lot of work to get our LB 643, the tax and regulate bill, introduced so I could have my own public hearing. Yeah. And so that upset me. It was right at the end, but the chairman of the judiciary was one of the introducers, and so it's hard to get mad. But just in knowing the system, in insisting that they let me testify, I got to testify on both bills. So I got to testify in as a proponent for the tax and regulate bill, and then I came in as neutral at the end on the decriminalization bill. And that's a tactic I've used. I've testified in lots and lots of public hearings. And if you come in neutral, then you get to counterpoint the opposition's declaration that the sky is falling and the kids will die in the streets, and the spike in edible overdoses and drug driving deaths related to cannabis is not caused by cannabis.
So do you think any of those bills will get a positive vote in the chamber?
In watching our legislature the last couple of years or last couple of days, we are almost a third of the way through, and we haven't even gotten to one bill, a debate on the floor, because they're fighting over Republicans versus Democrats on committee placement and placement of bills either in the Health and Human Services or Judiciary, to where it doesn't really matter. But I think I have a really good chance of getting this recreational bill out of committee, because we have 4 that are for it and 4 that are against. And so I only have to turn 1 senator. And there's a couple of them that I think my message of if you don't tax and regulate it, then we have an estimation of $34 million in tax revenue you're handing over to the black market, and you're not giving a income that is 3 hours away in Missouri to Nebraska farmers.
Yeah, and if you're on the western part of the state, they can go into Colorado and pick it up
Oh,
there because you border
and you know,
Colorado.
our western part of our state is more rural, and
Yeah,
here in the eastern part of the state, a lot of people don't think that those rural people count as much as the urban people, but I believe that they count as much or more. They want it more because up until Missouri being legal, they were closer to Colorado, and they are also, their kids can't come home from jobs in Colorado dispensaries because they get profiled by the local militarized local law enforcement. And
yeah.
it's
Well, that's the danger with drug criminalization, is we see the increased militarization of law enforcement officials all over the country, which you know is causes these horrible deaths we hear about with our young people.
Paul, when I started this, I had no clue the that militarized effort in this prohibited war on drugs. And I know other states, everybody has fought with it, and there's task forces everywhere. But that pipeline on I-80, we have fortified that so much right now that it stretches border to border and north, south, east, and west with these coordinated. Uh,
Yeah,
we don't want to implicate ourselves too much in saying the wrong buzzwords that may cause a.
right. I remember a friend of ours that is pretty infamous. He's been a marijuana activist since we were both kids. Dana Beal.
Sure,
He's
yeah,
done some time there in the Nebraska jails. I think he stayed off 80 and got busted on a side road.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah, no, Dana was cutting cross corners, and but
more than anybody I think in history, he's been busted at least 20 or 30 times. And anyway, he's still fighting it in New York.
He's still riding bales of
Yeah,
weed through the country. But
while we're talking about Nebraska, you mentioned that Nebraska was one of the first states that decriminalized marijuana, and also one of the first states that recriminalized marijuana. We came close to recriminalizing here in Oregon, but the legislature passed it and the governor signed it into law back in 1997, and we got 90,000 signatures to referendum it. And every county in the state of Oregon voted to keep recrim, and voted down, said no on recrim by 67% statewide. So it was a landslide against recriminalization. I think that's about as far as it got. But I remember an attorney from Omaha, Don Fiedler, and he was the normal representative for Nebraska and led the decriminalization law in the 70s. I think it was 78 that passed there in Nebraska. And then he became the national director of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, in the late 80s and early 90s. I know he is now passed away, but I just had to bring up the name of Don Fiedler and recognize him also as a pivotal Nebraska activist. Let me ask you this, Bill. People call you Farmer Bill.
Farmer Bill, yep.
That's because you are a farmer, and you have, like you said, 50 acres that you work there in eastern Nebraska. How is that going for you?
I'm not a real tractor, corn, and soybean farmer.
You're doing heirloom plants.
I'm a real barefoot, shorts, and in my tomato patch and ganja field farmer. It's we're just in a serious drought, and we've been that way for a long time. And so it's been probably 15, longer than that, years ago. I had over 300 tomato plants and probably 1,200 garlic plants and doing farmers market and an indoor market in Lincoln. And then both my parents came down with cancer. First my dad, and so I just gave all that up and moved into town to take care of them. And 5 years later, most of my beds have been taken over by weeds. Um,
Right. It's a lot of work, I know.
it's a tremendous amount of work, and 300 tomato plants is a little too much. But it's I had learned I'd always done Earth Day with my teepees, and that year, that spring after my mom passed, and I came across a legalized cannabis booth at the Earth Day Festival here in Lincoln, and wow, that sounds good. I can do that. I'm good at displaying. I'm good at this. And right away, we had a rally, and I was just learning about the quote kind bud, Paul, the seedless, higher potency weed. And
Right.
so I wanted to start growing again. And so,
And here you are. So
and
we're almost out of time, Bill. Let me
okay,
ask you this. If someone wants to support your movement for change in Nebraska, what's the best way to reach out to your group and your organization? If somebody wants to reach you, do you want to put out an
uh,
email or a
I,
phone
I've
number,
got an
website?
email, HempFarmerNE at Gmail. And I'm pretty sure that's it. I've been through a few emails, but
But NE,
NE
uh,
Nebraska
yeah.
at Gmail, and I'll make sure that's right for you. But one way or the other, I'm getting out on the petition trail with the petition. All persons have the right to use all plants in the genus cannabis, and we will have it on the ballot for 2024.
All right. Well, we wish you the best and hope to send some good energy and donations your way.
You
So
you
we've
know,
been talking to Bill Hawkins, Farmer Bill Hawkins in Nebraska, who's a longtime activist. I want to thank you for coming on the show, Bill. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
Paul, it's been a pleasure and an honor to know you for this long, and I've enjoyed our interactions at the Great Midwest Marijuana Harvest Festival in Madison, Wisconsin. But we all have to continue on this fight and educational journey that we're on to end the prohibition of cannabis. And so, thank you for your time, Paul.
Well, thank you. We've had Farmer Bill Hawkins in Nebraska. We want to thank you and keep working to restore hemp. Good night.
Peace and love, brother.
Peace and love.
Amen.
Indeed.
Okay.
Okay, well, get it.